A while back, I made this video on bringing back 2D, primarily discussing Disney while including other studios like DreamWorks' shift into 3D in the 21st century. And looking back upon older Disney films recently, I just really came to the conclusion that Disney needs 2D. And this is not coming from the perspective of the box office or abundance of 3D films recently for this year, but more just geared to how I miss what these films provided in Disney storytelling. And like I have constantly said, this shouldn't stop them from creating beautifully animated 3D stories because they have, but from where they started out in stories like Chicken Little, it just really felt disheartening to do this when so many of the 2000s Disney movies remain to be great underrated films, because there are just so many more art styles that they could do that allows for more expression and colors than what most of the revival era films still can't do. And we've actually seen that in films like Moana and Maui's tattoos that are 2D and on the tablecloths, and also in Raya somewhat, where it sort of looked like what Wish is trying to do for its style and its background. And I just find it disappointing that to celebrate 100 years they aren't going back to that traditional style in animation, as that is where it all began with. Why can't we just pay tribute by actually doing a movie in that style rather than trying to combine it to a so-and-so effect? And this is where I wanted to share a lot of my appreciation for several other different Disney films that made use of different designs for their animation. This is where I would highlight films like Hercules, Atlantis, Princess and the Frog, Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, and even Pocahontas. I mean, I could say it for all of the 2D films too, but I would just use these films mostly that have a particular style that was highlighted during their production that makes you appreciate the overall aesthetic choices, because there's just a certain intrigue about these films when they take an overall design choice and use it for the film itself that makes the characters unique in their own individual rights and make the background stand out more when you actually understand where it comes from. I mean, 3D films actually make their backgrounds and environments stand out a lot more than regular paintings, with worlds being able to be rendered for miles, but then again, those paintings really convey a certain feeling that highlights the story overall and where it's trying to take place. This is something we should start with a movie like Hercules. And Hercules is notable not only in the Renaissance, but around all Disney movies overall for being distinct and based around and actually worked with Gerald Scarfe, the English cartoonist who worked on The Wall, where directors Musker and Clements just noticed a direct correlation between Scarfe's style and the Greek vase painting style, which makes sense when you are trying to portray Greek mythology in your film. And that decision really paid off well with what we got with the stylized design of the characters, like what we see in Hades trying to represent him as the villain, and Hercules and Zeus being heroic and godlike and having the muses blend in well with the Greek vases that they were a part of. The jagged edges and everything else is just really perfect. Everything in this film really understands the expressions the characters are making and are interacting with the world itself, and it's a film that used CGI for some of the characters, where you do see how great it is to combine those elements that elevates it along with staying within that 2D style. It does everything right for the tone of the movie that really sells the music choices and the acting itself, because the story of Hercules does focus on him becoming a hero, learning to know what actually makes one as he goes along with other people's definitions of it, and of course elevates Hades' car salesman personality as well as everything he wanted to achieve. Because without this style, this movie wouldn't have worked the way it did with a more normal style, or probably 3D if it was more possible during this time. It just makes sense without knowing too much about the details surrounding the style, like you can agree with it, but you don't know exactly why. And this is similar in the case of Atlantis, taking inspiration from the style of Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, where you certainly feel that comic book style and sense of adventure throughout the film that really does take inspiration from how Hercules wanted to present its story. Not that it did, but you actually get what I mean when those particular films stuck with the style of a certain person where you can really feel that choice. The final pull-out scene of the movie, immediately before the end title card, was actually described by the directors as the most difficult scene in the history of Disney animation as well, showcasing the effort they were going to make it happen that wouldn't have been possible if they were making it in 2D. Sure, you can make it easy with 3D overall, but the work done here used with the multi-planing techniques that Disney has done for a long time really paid off with the scope of it all. Like they say, this shot begins here with Milo and Kita on a 16-inch piece of paper, but at the end it becomes equivalent of an 18,000-inch piece of paper, composed of other many pieces of paper showcasing how ambitious and wide it really was. And this was a film that also used more 3D extensively while seamlessly looking 2D at the same time with the characters in the world, proving that you could still do it as long as the overall style is there that makes it stand out. Everything about it shows a level of work and passion that makes the movie just more better as time goes on. Like, words cannot describe how baffled I am that this was a box office disappointment on its release when it had these so many elements and styles that make the story stand out, which is already great on its own. And the choice to make their cast diverse really works well, with each individual character representing presented in their own unique way, which of course is the heart of the movie of Atlantis. And this is spearheaded by the directors of Disney's greatest films, Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise, who made Hunchback and Beauty and the Beast, so we were going to get such rich, mature storytelling in the animation itself. And it is said that this style alone is responsible for the cult following the film has today, so you really see how important it was that they chose to do this, but it was really unfortunate to perform the way it did, so Disney could make way for their 3D films to compete with Pixar and DreamWorks. This movie just has so much to offer with these elements that it should truly be watched by everyone if they have the chance. And then, this brings us back to Mulan, where the style they went for was trying to be based around the style around the time in ancient China that the story takes place in. An important element of the design was to turn the art style closer to Chinese painting, with watercolor and simpler design than what other Disney films have provided. You can see this in the opening of the film with what they were trying to portray, and of course in the overall backgrounds of the movie, even if there are some areas that might not be as accurate to China in the story itself, which is more accurate than the remake ever could anyway. You can still feel how they wanted to capture the real elements of China throughout the film, where they did take teams down to Beijing and other cities in China to understand the landscape, the people, and the history of the legend, trying to have the artist capture the most important elements to put in the film itself and make Mulan the hero that we love. And Mulan still remains to be my favorite when it comes to animated style in a Disney movie because of that, because of how I just love Chinese art, and just seeing that even through the style of the avalanche really impresses me. I mean, this is a story that you can't really find to be portrayed in 3D for this type. I mean, other stories like Kung Fu Panda works, and that is for DreamWorks anyway, where they have these other 2D sequences in the film, but when regarding other things like the story of Mulan, it just really works the way it does, and that's something they couldn't capture today if they continued making the stories they have as is. You really need to use 2D to capture the heart and tone of the journey she is making in this style. And even though I'm not a big fan of Pocahontas or the style of the film overall in some characters, which some is a bit boring because of how bland the story is, there is a certain beauty to it all that can't be portrayed anywhere else. And that was the intention of the film when they were creating the look of Pocahontas, even modeled after her own voice actress. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I found out due to the complexity of what they have tried to make for her character, 55 animators worked on the animation on Pocahontas alone. And then, of course, you have these sequences like the colors of the wind, which is extremely gorgeous, trying to capture the beauty of Virginia in its most natural state with the animals, the forest, and the mountains, and of course the colors of the wind itself. It was something I expressed in my previous video questioning Disney's abandonment of the style of film for live action and strictly 3D with Ralph Breaks the Internet's design of Pocahontas, so off and so weird for one character that was beautifully done, which proved how some people perceive how characters are just better the way they are in films like this, and proves it with the story they were going for. You can't do it in another style because that ruins the intention of what is being done. There's just so much that can be said when you have these handcrafted, paper-driven works of art because it allows for the imagination to go places you can only dream of. You can do it in a computer, but there's just something about putting a pen to the paper and then watching it come to life after so many pages of hard work that we see right here. And once again, Lilo & Stitch proved another different style they can use in 2D with watercolor backgrounds, which really fit the portrayal of the islands like Hawaii with the feel that they were going for that I love because it brought me back to home. The designs themselves were all primarily based upon director Chris Sanders' personal drawing style, and you can feel that with the heart the characters had to portray such a local and intergalactic style of the creatures. Sanders preferred to use watercolors to be used for Lilo & Stitch to invoke the bright look of a storybook and the art direction of Dumbo, which clearly makes sense being based around his own sketches and of course the more limited budget, which they didn't have much to spend on like the CGI scenes, which proves how much they could still do that worked so well. Like honestly, with what they were given compared to other big films at the time, it was just amazing what they were able to work around. That really was a good choice to use those various watercolors and designs. I mean, some of this might be due to my bias because it is my most favorite Disney film ever, being Hawaiian myself, but I just love every choice that was made for this film where the alien designs actually match the designs of the humans really well. Not like they're the same, but they just really meshed great together in their own environments, whether it be on the ground and water throughout Hawaii or even up in space with the ships. It's just a movie that was clearly being lifted by being this way, being so charming and unique and modern with the local world they tried to convey. And then lastly, this brings us to Disney's last original traditional animated feature since Winnie the Pooh came out in 2011, and they've already done films like that for a while at this point with a film like Princess and the Frog, because when Musker and Clements were planning the animation of the film, they looked back to other Disney films like Lady and the Tramp, feeling that that was the pinnacle of the Disney style, the one they forgot about nowadays with these other films that they have released, which really influenced the way that they were going to portray New Orleans, where they also started to get more stylized within other Disney films they looked at. And thinking about this really feels like the type of film you would want for your 100th anniversary, considering how much influences they were taking from past Disney films for certain scenes and looks. Because this was the real intention of the film, where John Lasseter believed that traditional animation created more character believability, and how Andreas Deja, veteran Disney animator, also said that we should distinguish ourselves to go back to what 2D is good at, which is focusing on what the line can do rather than volume, which is actually what CG does. It's the believability of this large character being able to move around quite like that, where you can feel what they're trying to say with the lines and expressions each character has. And this is also shown throughout the song Almost There, which is really one of the best animated sequences Disney has ever produced, with this clear Art Deco style that was actually done on paper throughout and scanned throughout Photoshop. I mean, it is truly a beautiful sequence that can only be captured traditionally and not digitally to represent Tiana's dream within the film that's already primarily 2D already. It's adding these layers to the characters that explore their motivations and story to a new level, another thing you can't get in 3D or 2.5D or whatever you would like to call Wish. This probably will still change when the movie comes out and other trailers, mind you, from the posting of this video, but it just still feels like they haven't done enough when you put in those facts into context. Looking at what animators like Andreas have said, and even what John Lasseter said when working at Disney, really shows that 2D has a lot to offer for the stories that Disney manages to create so well but just stopped doing so for some reason. Like I said, it isn't wrong for them to do 3D because they're so beautiful and so great on their own, but then with what we've seen, they've hardly tapped into the surface of what 2D can still provide overall, and it's something I've learned to appreciate more and more from their past with how films like Snow White was made, because without it, none of the other Disney films would actually ever exist, with documentaries like The Reluctant Dragon showcasing the Disney process and Walt Disney himself with his passion for such work in these stories, the multiplane camera and the frame shots they do, the other art departments and the sketches that create an actual moving picture. It's something that you should really watch because it is so astonishing how they did it back then. It's just that we see Disney was built around these styles and wouldn't be able to exist without them, where I will keep imploring them to do so until the end of time because of how much potential they have, but just decided to stop for the past decade. With that said, I wish we will start to go back to 2D for Disney soon. So I'm all done. Goodbye.